Hey guys, welcome back to the Earning Your Badge from Home program. Today, y'all are going to earn your Coding for Good badge number 2 by building a maze game, which is really exciting. So, just a quick recap. When we're thinking of what the word programming means, when we're thinking of what code is, we're always thinking about instructions we're giving a computer in simple steps. Okay, so today as you build your blocks, you're going to think about breaking it down in simple steps, just like you may have already done so if you've coded previously. And you're going to think about how the order of your blocks also matters. So let's also think, as Girl Scouts, I think a lot of y'all are very happy to help other people. You think a lot about helping your community, right? So right now, some of us may be beginners, some of us may be pros, some of us might be in the middle, right? But no matter what stage you're in your journey to learning how to code, it's always great to start thinking about how can I use my code to do good for the world? How can I do it in a way where maybe I can build a game that can teach people about fire safety or staying safe during a hurricane, right? Maybe you want to teach people how to help others, how to do things like community service. Maybe there's an example of building an adventure game and a superhero goes through challenges of helping the homeless or rescuing a dog, right? Those are all ways that you could build a game and use code to teach other people important things about the world and add something really cool to the world that could be really helpful. So before y'all get started and getting settled in, make sure you run over and grab a piece of paper and a pencil, something to write with, so because you're going to be needing it a little later on in the video to plan out your maze game.
So let's take a look at what project you guys are going to be making today is. So in this maze game, there's a couple things that are happening. One, my Sprite Cat is always going to be starting at this green dot, and it's going to be moving with my arrow keys. So obviously you guys can't see me hitting my arrow keys right now, but Sprite Cat can move right or left or up or down. And just like in a real maze, your cat can't go through the walls that you've created. So if I keep hitting up, I'm hitting my arrow key up, but it's just bouncing right off of those purple walls. And then the last bit is this is kind of more similar to maybe Pac-Man, where there are dots placed around the screen, and your cat is trying to eat them. So we're gonna go through the whole thing, trying to get all the way through. Still eating the dots as we're going through. And then when our Sprite Cat gets to the red spot, our backdrop changes. So there's some fun stuff going on. We'll keep going from there. All right, so let's take a look at how we're actually going to make this thing. Okay, let's start out by planning what your program's going to need so that everything stays organized as you are building. So with this, obviously you're going to need some sort of maze. And with that, maze with walls that leave lots of room for your sprite to move. So thin walls, wide paths. Super important because you want your sprite to have lots of room to move. Otherwise, you're going to have bugs in your code that I'll get a little deeper into later. But always good to make everything run as smoothly as possible. Thin walls and wide paths are super important. So let's think more functionality, right? Well, you're going to need a sprite that can move with all 4 arrow keys. So sprite to move, I'm going to say in 4 directions with arrow keys. Okay, so that part of that code is done. The sprite has to detect when it's touching a wall. Super important, right? Because otherwise, how is it going to know not to walk through it or know when to receive some sort of instruction as to bounce off the wall? So that's the next bit, right? It must detect a wall and bounce off of it. And then the last bit is it also has to detect those black dots we've placed around. and receive an instruction to make them disappear. Now we're going to go a little deeper into this because what these black dots are is, you may or may not be familiar with the hide block in Scratch, where it's basically a block that you can put on your sprites, and it does exactly what it sounds like. It makes your sprite hide. You can no longer see it. Since these black dots aren't sprites, we can't add a code to the dots themselves telling them to just go away when our cat touches them. So instead, what we're going to do is we are going to, I don't want to say cheat the system because it's really not that, but we are going to have a little bit of an unconventional solution, which is, even though it looks like your cat is like eating the black dots, what we're going to do instead is we are going to have our cat color white over the black dots when it touches it. It still makes the black dots go away. No one just has to know how they're going away. Okay, so instead, when we're coloring over them with white or whatever the color of your backdrop is, you want to make sure it matches the color of your backdrop. Our black dots still disappear. So we are going to say sprite colors over black dots. And in my game, since the background is white, I'm going to say with white. And then the last bit is a little bit of a celebration when Sprite Cat detects that it's touching our red spot at the end. So Sprite has to detect red. And what's my celebration going to include? I am going to say switch backdrop. Right, I want it to go to a new backdrop. Get bigger. And we will say change color. So that is all that Sprite Cat does when it detects red. So that is our entire game pretty much. And so forth. This is the order that we are going to build our project. Now, let's just take a quick second to draw out what our maze is going to look like, because obviously drawing on the computer is a lot harder than drawing with a pencil. So knowing what you're already going to do and having something to go off of while you're doing it on the computer certainly helps a lot. Feel free to not make your maze anything look like mine. You can if you want to. If you want to make your maze harder or easier, that's totally up to you. This is your game. I'm going to make mine relatively easy. Just one super big thing is you have to plan for it to be the same color all the way through, because the color of the walls is how your sprite is going to detect that it's touching a wall. So you want to make sure that is super consistent and has to be the same color throughout. Other than that, there are no big restrictions other than all your dots have to be the same color throughout as well. So since my maze is going to be purple, I'm going to pick purple. I'm just going to say, okay, I just want a simple, not a great artist, but I just want a simple L type thing going, or like a U shape, I guess is better, a sideways U. So I'm going to say, this will be my path. This will be my path. I'll just go through. And then my entrance point will be here. I'm not going to color that in perfectly. Oh, okay. And then I'm going to have my exit be up here. Okay, drawing. So we are going to keep that as it is. I just have something to go off of. Again, feel free to take a few extra minutes, pause the video, and keep working on your maze so if you would like to make it more challenging. So this is what your screen probably looks like right now. Let's click on create so we can open up a brand new project and get this maze going. So for starters, obviously we need our maze backdrop. So to do that, I'm going to click on this rectangle here on the far right side of my screen. It's called stage. Click here. So notice how my blocks changed a little bit. So you'll know that you're in the stage once you don't have any motion blocks. It says no motion blocks. And also the tab here says backdrops. If you miss that, again, so click here. This is where you're working with sprites. To get to your stage, you click on this rectangle on the far right side of your screen, so that now anything you're adding, you can add code to your backdrops, stuff like that. Any work you're doing in this workspace has to do with your backdrops. So I clicked on this backdrops tab right next to code so that I can draw my maze. And in order to draw, I am going to select my square tool so I can create those easy rectangular walls around. And then you can select your fill to be anything. It can be purple or whatever. The only thing is, once you've picked a fill, stick with it. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click here on this outline box. I'm going to click inside, and I am going to click on this red line going diagonal in the bottom left corner. Now, the reason you don't want an outline on your walls is because the color of your walls is how your sprite is going to detect them. And if there's another color surrounding the purple, your code's not going to work. So there has to be zero outline. You can make it whatever fill you want, but it's super important that there's no outline. So remember, click on this square and select this red line here. So to make my walls, it's going to be very similar to how you may have created other shapes on other platforms where you can draw. I'm just going to click and drag, and you can make your rectangle as large or as wide as you want. And after you let go, immediately after, there will be these blue controls that will appear on the outline, and these can be used to adjust your shapes. I'm going to click and drag like this, and I can make it like that. If you lose those controls, all you got to do is click on your select tool and then click on the shape that you're trying to change, and then you'll get those controls right back. So you can't necessarily get them when you're always on the rectangle tool. So make a maze, take a few seconds. I'm just going to keep clicking and dragging my maze. Doesn't have to be super perfect. Just follow the plan that we created earlier. So take a second, just clicking and drawing. That's all. Clicking and dragging is all I'm doing here. And then super, super important again, have to make sure that you leave nice wide open pathways for your sprite. So nice wide open pathways, relatively thin walls. That's what matters. You want your sprite to have lots of room to move. You don't want it to be squished in there. Otherwise your code's gonna have a couple glitches. So I got my maze going the way I want it to. And then the last bit that I'm going to create is those red and green circles. That's the last shape that we're going to be working with. It's those circles. So I'm going to click on my circle tool. Remember, maintaining zero outline. I'm going to change the fill to be green. So all you got to do is adjust these knobs to do that. And then same way I created my rectangles, I'm going to click and drag to create my circle. So that looks the way I wanted to. Now I'm going to create one more that's red. So I'm going to click and drag. Now I know this is still green, but once those blue circles appear, those blue controls appear, I can click on my fill and change the color of my circle. But you can't change the color unless it's been selected. So if you need to, you can click on your cursor tool and you can select it, and you can adjust anything you need to. So click on it and you can change the fill. All right, so the last thing that we are going to do is we are going to add those blue dots. Y'all, this is the easiest part. All we're gonna do is click on our paintbrush, and I am going to change my fill to be black. I'm gonna make the size, you don't want your dots to be super big. The smaller the dots, the better this is also going to work. But obviously you still want to be able to see them. So I'm gonna make it like 15 and we'll see how that looks. Actually, I'm gonna make it even a little smaller. Let's do like 12 and keep it at that. Okay. And so this paintbrush tool, we are just going to use it to essentially stamp these black dots all the way through our maze. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to click once and it'll lay the dot there. So it's just like stamping. So I'm going to click and then move so I can place dots all the way through. Feel free to choose another color for your dots as well. So I'm just clicking and stamping. So click once. You want to make sure you let go because you don't want to be dragging with this so that you can just create those easy black circles. If you drag, you're going to start to create like squiggly lines, and we don't want that. So just clicking and stamping. Okay, so that looks good. We have our backdrop all done now. Let's get our code going with our Sprite Cat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click back on this code tab, And then I'm going to select my Sprite Cat. Remember, these are the workspaces you're working in. So whatever workspace you're on will be highlighted in blue like this. So before, when I was on my stage workspace, my stage was blue. Now that I'm trying to add code for my sprite, I'm trying to get my sprite to move around the screen and do fun things, I have to click on my sprite. So I'm in that workspace. Super, super important, especially when you start adding multiple sprites in your game. So obviously, Sprite Cat right now is way too big to fit in this maze. So let's grab an event block. Let's grab our when green flag clicked, because as soon as our game starts, this is what event that your computer is going to be searching for to start whatever code we have placed underneath. So I'm going to go to looks, and I am going to grab this set size to block. And I'm just going to attach it to my when green flag clicked. And then inside, I'm going to change this number to be something where Sprite Cat is small enough to fit through the entire maze. I'm going to choose like 40. And then I'm going to hit my green flag to see what size it goes to. That looks pretty good to me. You can move through without like really running into any walls. It's got plenty of room to move. That looks fine to me. And by the way, guys, if you don't want to work with Sprite Cat, that's totally fine. All you got to do is click on this blue circle here that says choose a sprite, and you can pick any sprite. They got lots of options for you. So it doesn't have to be Sprite Cat. Your number for the size it needs to be might vary a little bit because obviously all the sprites look a little different. But just this number is probably not going to be the same for you if you have a different sprite. That's okay. Just as long as it can fit through your maze, that's all that really matters. Next, I want my Sprite Cat to always, when I hit my green flag, start at this green circle. So easiest way to do that is I'm going to click and drag my Sprite Cat to sit right on top of that green spot. Now I want you to pay attention to these XY bubbles here. Now XY, most of you might know, is a way for us to represent location, right? You're used to seeing it on graphs or a grid, some way for us to represent our Sprite Cat's location on the screen. So these numbers, we don't have to do a ton with them. All we're going to do is I want you to click and drag your Sprite Cat all around the screen and notice how they change, because obviously different locations mean different XY values. So we are going to say, okay, I want my Sprite Cat to return to the XY that it is when it's sitting on top of the green spot. So this should be the XY value that Sprite Cat should be at every time we hit the green flag, because this location is where the green spot is. So to do that, I'm going to go to motion and I'm going to grab my go to XY. Now to make y'all's lives easier, move your cat to where you want it to start and then go to your motion blocks, because it will automatically fill these go to XY bubbles for you. So if I move my cat here, notice how these numbers changed here as well. So instead of having to put them in yourself, all you have to do is move your Sprite Cat to be here, let the numbers change for you, and grab this go to XY and place it right underneath your set size 240. So that is going to tell my Sprite Cat, no matter where it ends up at the end, it knows always where to begin. So now let's get Sprite Cat just moving with our arrow keys. So to do that, I'm going to go back to events, and I'm going to grab this when space key pressed event block. So obviously we're not hitting our space keys, we are hitting our arrow keys. So I'm going to click inside of space, and I'm going to grab the up arrow key. Obviously when I hit my up arrow key, Sprite Cat's got to move up. And since it's moving in 4 different directions, I'm going to grab 4 of these event blocks and change them to say up, down, right, and left, so that we are checking for all of our arrow keys. So there's my 4 event blocks. And now let's get our motion blocks to get it actually moving with our arrow keys. So with this, we got to break this down a little bit further. We can't just say, yo, Sprite Cat, go up. It's not that easy. We have to break it down into even more simple steps. So instead, we're going to say is, okay, detect whatever arrow key I'm pressing in. And for example, if I'm hitting the up arrow key, face in the up direction and then move in that direction. So now we're taking something that we previously said was 1 step, go up, and we're saying, okay, make it 2 steps now. Face the direction while still standing in place. And once you're in the direction you want to be moving in, then actually walk that way. So to do that, first let's tell it what direction it needs to face by grabbing the point in direction block. And I'm going to use my up arrow key first. And I'm going to click inside of this point in direction and change this arrow key to be facing up. Easy way. And notice how those numbers change. It's in just like with X, Y's, there you can use numbers to represent location. You can also use numbers to represent direction. We don't need to necessarily memorize these numbers because we have this handy circle that appears that we can change stuff with. So this is going to tell my Sprite Cat it needs to point in the upwards direction. Cool. Now let's get it to, okay, it knows what direction it needs to move in, and I hit the up arrow key and see how it's facing upwards, but it's still not going anywhere. Well, okay, let's do the second step. Take steps in that direction. So for that, all you're gonna do is grab this move 10 steps block, place it underneath, and when you hit the green flag, when you hit your up arrow key, Sprite Cat moves up. I'm hitting my right, left, and down arrow keys now. Nothing's happening because we haven't placed any code underneath, but it's going to be very similar code. So again, I'm going to grab, now looking at my when right arrow key pressed, I'm going to grab another point in direction, click inside. This arrow key is already facing to the right, so I don't need to change that. And now I'm going to grab a move 10 steps and place it right underneath. So now Sprite Cat can move to the right. So I recommend, or I encourage you guys to try to figure out the last 2 directions on your own and compare your code with mine to see if you got them right. So again, with down, grab a point in direction, and I'm going to change this arrow key to be facing downwards, and another move 10 steps. Be super careful with what direction you're making this arrow face and make sure that it matches the arrow key event block that you have. So if you have the down arrow key, make sure that this arrow isn't facing to the left. It has to be facing down. That's a really common error I see is these point in directions arrows not matching the event block that the student is using. And in turn, it makes your Sprite Cat maybe move left even when you're hitting the right arrow key and stuff like that. So be really careful about double checking that so you avoid that error. So now with the last left arrow key pressed, I'm going to click inside and I'm going to change this arrow to be facing to the left. And then one last move 10 steps. So now Sprite Cat can move in all 4 directions. Notice how Sprite Cat goes upside down when it goes to the left. That's not a big deal. That's just going to happen. So don't worry about that if that's happening. As long as it's moving in that direction, that's what you want. And I'm going to hit my green flag again, and Sprite Cat goes right back to my to my green spot. So next bit is let's get our Sprite Cat bouncing off these purple walls, because clearly right now they're not really doing anything, and that kind of defeats the purpose of a maze. So to do that, I'm going to go back to looking at this when green flag clicked script. Remember, scripts are sections of our code. So here I have 5 scripts because there are 5 different sets of instructions. And I am going to say, okay, when our green flag is clicked is when Sprite Cat should begin wondering if it's touching purple walls. It should begin detecting if it's touching a purple wall. And every time it detects that it's touching purple, it is going to be told to bounce off of that wall. So since we're dealing with checking for a certain condition, a certain situation, remember we're checking if we're touching purple, we are going to go to control and grab this if then. Now what this if then does, this is called an if statement. So it allows our sprite to check for certain situations, and if they are true, so this is where we would check the situation. If the situation is true, then run whatever code we are placing inside of what looks like kind of an empty space. It looks like we could fit one of these blocks inside of here, right? So we are checking if Sprite Cat is touching this purple, because this purple is consistent through my entire maze. I know if my Sprite Cat is touching purple, it's touching a wall. And that's always going to be the case. That's why it's super important that your whole maze is the same color. Because if it's a bunch of different colors, it might not necessarily work through the entire maze. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on sensing, and I'm going to grab this touching color sensing block. Now, obviously, it looks a little bit bigger, but it also looks like something that could fit inside of this shaded hexagon here with my if-then statement. So I'm going to click, and I'm going to drag this into that hexagon. Notice how it highlights blue when I come near it. If I lead in from the left side, it's not going to work. You have to lead in from the right side, and then when you let go, your if statement will now be filled with your sensing block. It'll enlarge so that it can fit the whole thing inside. Obviously, this is not the color of my purple maze. Now, guys, again, super, super important. You do not want to be trying to change these knobs to match your maze, because as close as it may look to our eyes, if it's not the exact same color, your code's not going to work. So the easiest way to make sure that you are picking up the exact color of your maze is you are going to select this gray tool here at the bottom. It's a dropper tool. So I'm going to click here. And then when I move over here, see how I have this giant circle now surrounding my cursor? I am going to line up that tiny little gray square that's in the center of that big circle that I'm moving around with whatever color I'm trying to pick up. So notice how my gray square is now in line with my purple maze, and my circle now is outlined in purple. That means when I click, it automatically fills this touching color sensing block with the color of my maze. I'll show you again what happens if you pick up a different color. So what happens if I pick up this black? Now my circle outlines in black because that's the color it's detecting, because remember, it's lining up that giant or that tiny little gray square in the center. When I click, now my touching color is filled with black. Right now, we are trying to check if we're touching purple. So I'm going to pick up that purple color. Cool. So now let's place something inside of our if statement to get our Sprite Cat to do something when it detects a wall. Right now it's saying, okay, I know I'm touching a wall, but I'm not doing anything about it because you haven't placed any code inside of this to tell me I need to do something as a result. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to confuse Sprite Cat a little bit. You see, when you're hitting your arrow keys, you're always giving your cat some sort of instruction to go forward, right? You're always saying move 10 steps in some sort of direction. So what we're going to say is we're going to tell Sprite Cat to move backwards when it hits the purple wall. Because what's going to be happening is it's going to start to receive two instructions at the same time. You're going to be hitting your arrow keys, trying to get Sprite Cat to go inside the wall, right? You're trying to move it into the wall, hitting your arrow keys repeatedly, which means you're also giving Sprite Cat that repeated instruction of go forward. So when you have some sort of code inside of your if statement checking if Sprite Cat is touching the wall, telling Sprite Cat to move backwards, which is the opposite of forwards, you're giving it an opposite direction, Sprite Cat's going to get confused. It's going to say, you're telling me to go forwards by hitting your arrow keys, but you're also telling me to go backwards since I'm touching this purple wall. And in reality, can any of us go forwards and backwards? No, that doesn't make sense. How can you go in two directions at once, right? Same thing with Sprite Cat. So it's going to get confused and in turn, not really move too much forward or backwards. So to give it that backwards instruction, all I'm going to do is go to motion. I'm going to use my move 10 steps block, place it inside of that if statement. I'm going to click on move 10 steps and I'm going to say move minus 10 steps. That is equal and opposite to 10, right? Now, if you change these move 10 steps to say like 15 or 20 because you wanted Sprite Cat to move faster, totally fine. All you got to do is make sure that all of these are the same number. If you said 15, all of these move 10 steps have to, or all these move steps have to say 15. And also here it would have to say move minus 15. So these have to match this block that's inside of this if statement. Only difference is this one has to have the minus in front of it. Now, I'm going to run this. Let's see what happens. My Sprite Cat can still move through the walls. Now, you see, computers are really lazy. So even though I have that if statement there telling my Sprite Cat to check if it's touching purple, once it checks once it asks the question of, am I touching purple? your Sprite Cat's never going to check again, which means it's not going to actually prevent itself from going through the walls, because it's going to say, okay, I'm not going to wonder if I'm touching purple again because you only told me to check once. When in reality, we want Sprite Cat constantly wondering if it's touching purple, ready to pounce on the opportunity to run this block inside when it does touch purple. So to tell this if statement to constantly be running, to tell Sprite Cat to constantly be wondering, I'm going to go to control, and I am going to grab this forever loop, and I'm just going to wrap it around my if statement. All you got to do is click, drag, hover until your forever loop is like that shadow appears, and only your if statement is inside. You still want these two blocks to be above your forever loop. The only thing that needs to be inside is your if statement. So now when I hit my green flag, Sprite Cat can't go through those purple walls. So the last bit that we are going to add is, let's get Sprite Cat to detect when it's touching those black dots. And like we talked about earlier, it's going to color over it with white. We're going to kind of follow the same process of, just this time, instead of checking if we're touching purple, we're going to check if we're touching black. So let's grab another if statement. This one I'm actually going to put in a script of its own. So I'm going to grab a forever loop to wrap it around because I know I'm already going to need that. I'm going to grab an event block that says when green flag clicked. Just because this has to do with the Sprite Cat's motion, and this is going to have to do with coloring. And since they have two very different roles, I prefer to keep them separated so that my code stays organized. So inside of this if statement, we're going to grab another if touching black, touching color, something block. I'm going to click inside, grab that dropper tool, and I'm going to hover until my whole circle outlines in black. I'm going to click, and it automatically fills everything in there. So now Sprite Cat can detect when it's touching a black spot, but how do we get it to color over it? There aren't any blocks here that are loaded in right now where Sprite Cat can actually put down some sort of color like a pen on a paper. So what we are going to do is, I want you to click on this blue square in the bottom left corner of your screen that says add extension when you hover over it. So I want you to click, and then out of these extensions that pop up, I want you to click on this pen, draw with your sprites. And now you have a whole other brand new set of blocks that you didn't even know you could work with. So we are going to use this pen to draw with our sprite. Now all of these blocks, what they allow our sprite to do is to put down color on the background behind it. So same way as when you're working with a pen and paper, when you're looking at these pen down and pen up blocks, same thing. I want you to imagine your pencil physically like touching your paper, physically making contact with your paper, and that would be using the pen down block. And the pen up block is the same thing as if your pencil was like hovering over top of your paper. Since it's not physically touching that paper, it's not going to make contact, and it's not going to make any lines, right? It sounds really, really self-explanatory, but these are going to be super important because we only want Sprite Cat to be drawing when it's touching black. If it's not touching black, I don't want it to be drawing, and I'm going to want its pen to be up, because otherwise what's going to happen is it's going to try drawing over top of these spots, and you don't want that. You only want it to ever be worrying about drawing white when it's touching these black spots. So in order to do that, I am going to grab a pen down block, and I'm just going to let it hang out in my workspace. Do not attach it to anything yet, because we aren't going to need an if statement here, but we're going to need one more extra piece. That is actually going to be going to control and grabbing this if then else. Did not mean to have that go in there. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this sensing block in here and place it inside of this portion, this new if then else. Get rid of this if statement here. And I am going to use this. Now you might be wondering, what is the point of adding that if statement there in the first place if we were just going to change it? Well, it got your mind in that mindset of, okay, we're checking for a specific color. Now what this else portion does is it gives us that same feature of being able to have an if, but it gives us an extension of saying, okay, Anytime that my Sprite Cat isn't touching black, anytime that this situation is false and my Sprite Cat is not touching black, it knows to go to another specific command. Because right here, we have the same place. We have room to add specific commands. So it's just with an if then, you don't have that extra capability. You don't have an extra spot to say, okay, if whatever we're checking for isn't happening, do this. That's what an else allows you to do. Because, like I said before, you only want your pen to be down when you're touching black. If you're not touching black, you don't want to be drawing, and you want your pen to just be hovering over your paper, and that is what's going to go inside of the else. Now we still have to add a couple other things with our pen blocks. Obviously, pen down isn't going to be quite enough. We are going to set our pen color to be white, and I'm going to drag that inside of touching color black, because that's when you want your pen to be white. I'm going to use my dropper, pick up that white to make my life super easy. Now I have the exact color of my backdrop, and I am going to also grab this set pen size to block. I'm going to place it underneath set pen color to white. I'm going to change set pen size to say, let's do 13. That's probably good enough. You want it to be large enough. Think about trying to cover a huge spot with a really thin pencil. It's much easier if you have a really wide marker to make broader lines and fully cover that white dot when you're trying to go over top. So now I'm going to hit my green flag. I'm going to move my Sprite Cat with my arrow keys. Now it's coloring white over those black dots, and it's not going to color white over my purple lines. And it's also, if I go back to this green, not going to color over top that green. It's only going to be coloring over top of the black. So I'm going to keep going through. It's not going to be perfect, and if you feel like it's not covering over those black lines good enough, you can always change your pen size to be larger. So I'm going to say, let's try 16. You don't want your pen size to be too huge, because otherwise it will start coloring over those purple lines. So here right now when it's 16, notice how those black dots didn't reappear. That's okay. We're going to add some code to fix that in a second. Let's see how it performs. Still not great. Well, actually, yeah, that's a little better. Okay. But if I have this pen size super huge, say I have it like 30, it will be, okay, maybe it needs to be bigger than 30 if I have it at like 100. Really quick to make sure we can keep testing it out since we don't have our black, I'm going to grab this erase all block, and I'm going to place it underneath this when green flag clicked. Now, since we are making markings over top of our black, we need to be able to get our black back once again, right? So all we're going to do is erase those markings we did over them, and they'll all reappear. So now let me show you what happens when we have a huge pen size. Now with our pen size being so large, even though it's still coloring anytime I'm touching the black, it has so much area that it can cover that it is touching much more than just the black and covering much more, which is why you want it to be big enough to cover your spots, but not too large. So I'm going to keep it back at 16. Hit my green flag. And now let's get it moving. There we go. Had to hit the green flag again so that it updated. And move through and test out your cat. Cool. And then I hit my green flag again, and everything resets. So the one last thing we are going to do is we are going to say, okay, we got a lot of code here, but let's just make our Sprite Cat kind of transport to a new place when it finally gets to that red spot. So we're going to change our backdrop. So what I'm going to do is, this is kind of like a fun extension just to make your game a little bit more exciting. It's like a surprise in a way. You're going to go over here to this blue choose a backdrop circle. When you hover over it, all these options appear. I'm just going to click on choose a backdrop and pick a new backdrop. You don't have to pick colorful city, but that's what I'm going to do. There's a whole library for you to choose from. I'm going to click here and my backdrop changed. Well, the only time I want my backdrop to actually change is when I get to that red spot, that final red spot. So let's say, okay, as soon as I start my game, I want to be looking at my maze. So I'm going to click on stage again, just so y'all can see a little better. we have two backdrops here. Nothing disappeared, nothing went away. They're both just stored here. It's just a matter of telling Sprite Cat where to go. So we are going to say, since the name of this backdrop is backdrop 1, we are going to tell Sprite Cat to start here always. So click back on your sprite and click back on code so you can get back to this workspace. And if we want Sprite Cat to always start at this backdrop 1, all we're going to do is say switch backdrop to, click inside, and select backdrop 1. And you're just going to place that underneath when green flag clicked. So now, same thing that we've done here where we've told Sprite Cat to always be the same size as it starts and always go to the same location. Every time we start our game, it should also always go back to the same maze backdrop. And then we're going to say, okay, we've been checking if we're touching colors all day. Let's do it one more time. And we don't need a whole new script for this because it's just one if statement. We are going to say, okay, let me grab another if statement. I'm going to place it underneath this one, inside of the forever loop, but not inside of the other if statement, just underneath. And let's check if we are touching red now, because when it touches red, it means it has reached the end of the maze. So once again, grabbing that dropper tool, hovering over and picking up that red spot. And then I'm going to move these scripts around so we have a little bit more room to work. And then the last thing is, okay, once I get to red, let's change our backdrop to be that fun city. So let's grab switch backdrop to, click inside and change it to say colorful city this time. And now the only time your Sprite Cat's actually able to get to that new backdrop that you loaded in, that was called whatever, if it was named Nebula or Neon Tunnel or anything like that, it would say Neon Tunnel or Nebula inside of here. Since the name of the second backdrop I chose was colorful city, that is why I have that inside of this switch backdrop to block. So now when we hit our green flag and get all the way through our maze, while still eating those white dots, or sorry, those black dots, when we get to that city, we get to a new backdrop. Now, one last thing, you have all of those white markings that you created following you because obviously now they don't blend into the backdrop. So one last final block we're going to add is I'm going to go to pen and I am going to grab this erase all block, telling our Sprite Cat to get rid of all of its markings before it gets to that new backdrop so that we don't see them. So place it inside of your if statement that says if touching color red. Now let's hit our green flag again, test that one last time. Just hitting my arrow keys, moving through. Still can't go through the walls no matter where I am in my maze. And I am going to through. And now you don't have any of those extra white spots. These are clouds that were already in the backdrop, so we don't have to worry about that. And everything looks all good. So y'all got a lot of code on here. We learned about events, a new type of conditional with if then else, maybe a new kind of extension with pens that you may or may not have known before. So let's name our project real quick. I'm going to call it Maze Game. Maybe you want to call it Maze Surprise or anything like that. And then if there is a save now message appearing here, click on it, it'll save your game. For me right now, it's not appearing because Scratch automatically saved my project. So if that message is appearing or if it's not, click on it. If it isn't appearing, it means that your game is all saved and you won't lose your progress. And make sure that you are logged in. If it says sign in, click on the sign in button and you can log in your account details. But all right, your project's all complete. Congratulations, you've earned your second Coding for Good badge.